What's up, everybody? Paul Greene-Dennis here. Sorry about that. And welcome to the Paul Greene-Dennis live read shows. Paul Greene-Dennis, um, Paul Greene-Dennis nonfiction live reads. And voice actor here, musician, singer. And I say live nonfiction, especially for me. I'm in the process of what I call deprogramming myself. So I'm doing nonfiction that I feel is informative, very informative to what is important in history right now. And I've been doing, in case you haven't been noticing, I've been doing live readings of One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. And a very informative read because, again, if you've been watching corporate media, it's one of those, why haven't we've been talking about this? Why hasn't this been ever talked about before? Unless you're in independent media. But I'm coming at this from do this like a read aloud so we could all learn together. We learn together to deprogram what we were taught or shoved down our throat and what actually went down. So this is One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1, Chapter 8, Clinton Contra. This is not as long as a killer enterprise or a private CIA, the previous two chapters, chapters 7 and 6. This chapter is roughly in the 70-page range, I believe. Maybe a tad bit shorter. But I figure, you know what? Keep it rolling with this reading here because there's a lot to learn. What about the mingling of organized crime and intelligence in our government about what's really went down. So with that being said, let's get into it. If you are here, say hello if you are here, and let's get into it. Chapter 8, Clinton Contra. First section of this chapter, Seal the Smuggler. On October 5th, 1986, the Enterprise took a mortal. Actually, you know what? Nah. Let's just see if anybody shows up for a bit. Give everybody a chance to show up for a bit here. If not, I'll proceed. So, for those who are coming through onto this read, this is chapter 8 of One Nation Under Blackmail, the first part by Whitney Webb. Sorry. Just make sure, just waiting a few more minutes, see if anybody some people show up and whatnot. But hey, Sherry. Hey. Hold on. You know what? I do that for another time. Sorry about that. So, once again, for those who are here, Chapter 8 of One Nation under Blackmail. Chapter 8, Clinton Contra. The first part, Seal the Smuggler. On October 5th, 1986, the Enterprise took a mortal blow. At 9:50 a.m., a C-123K military transport aircraft took off from the Ilopango military base, carrying a stockpile of weapons, ammunition, and explosives in its hull. These were to be airdropped into the Nicaraguan jungle for the Contras, but the plane never made it to its destination. It was instead shot down by Sandinista forces, killing three of the four-man crew. The sole survivor, Eugene Hassifus of Wisconsin, was subsequently captured. Under interrogation, he began to detail what he knew of the wide-ranging plot to arm the Contra rebels. The first official communication surrounding the plane came through Felix Rodriguez, who alerted Samuel Watson, an aide to Vice President Bush, that an aircraft had gone missing. A day later, on October 6, Rodriguez contacted Watson again with an update. Soon, Oliver North was bound for El Salvador. Meanwhile, cover stories were being drafted in a desperate attempt to provide an alternative explanation of events. Despite their efforts, North and the Enterprise were out of luck, and within days, congressmen were calling for inquiries into the crash. The FBI began nosing around Southern Air Transport's Miami offices, and the press started to run stories about different aspects of their clandestine activities. It was all unraveling at a fast pace. As with most things related to the Enterprise, mystery begat more mystery. Hassifus, for example, had been hired to serve as a crewman on the doomed C-123K by a company called Corporate Air Service, which was registered in Pennsylvania but had offices in Miami. Corporate Air was revealed to be a phantom company, and its Miami location was actually Southern Air Transport's headquarters at the Miami airport. What? The history of the C-123K was itself a tangled web. In 1983, it had been purchased from the U.S. Air Force by Harry Doan, the proprietor of a Florida aviation company called Doan Helicopters. It had been picked up by the Enterprise in March 98, 1986 via a front company called Udall Research Corporation. More of these front companies. It's a front company everywhere where you're doing illegal stuff. Udall registered in Panama, was also involved in the construction of the airstrip in the Santa Elena region of Costa Rica. Papers recovered from North Safe described Udall as an operating company. Udall was not alone in acquiring this C-123K from Doan. It had been previously fallen into the hands of one Adler Barryman Barry Seal, the commercial pilot turned drug smuggler and CIA asset. Here we go again. Drug smugglers and pilots and everything. Seal had picked up the plane, used it for drug smuggling flights, and then returned it to Doan helicopters in July 1985. Seal, importantly, was connected to the same criminal figures that had been woven into the covert Contra support network. Beginning in 1981, Seal had begun to ferry cocaine on behalf of Jorge Ochoa, one of the Medellin cartel's founding members. In a few years, Seal's Medellin smuggling had expanded considerably, with police attention mounting in his home state in Louisiana. Seal set up a new base of operations in rural Arkansas. The location that Seal selected was the Intermountain Municipal Airport in Mena, Arkansas, near the Arkansas-Oklahoma border. Mena was a small, unassuming town, yet throughout the 1980s, the area encircling the airport became a hotbed of intrigue. In 1989, journalist John Cummings, in one of the first articles written on Seal in Mena, wrote that Seal had virtually taken over a local aircraft repair and modification operation at the airport, and the good citizens of Mena began to notice some strange going-ons. Landings at night, tight security around Seal's planes, a hangar converted into a virtual fortress. There were also sightings of what appeared to be airdrops, the construction of airstrips deep in the woods beyond the airport, and even darker rumors that whatever was happening was sanctioned by the CIA. The report of the Kerry Commission on Narcotics later stated that associates of Seal were targets of grand jury probes into narcotics trafficking. Yet these cases were dropped despite the strong protests of the state and federal law enforcement officials. The apparent reason, the report continues, was that the prosecution might have revealed national security information. Jack Anderson wrote in the Washington Post that after Seal died in 1986, IRS investigators descended upon Mena and seized reports and other documents from the smugglers' offices there. The IRS was keeping its report under wraps, but Anderson relayed its name, Contra Mena Connection. The absence of a release report of this report allowed a comprehensive firewall to be set in place, permitting investigators to quietly detail the story of Seal and that of Iran-Contra. That the plane shot down in Nicaragua had been used by Seal was written off as mere coincidence, with the intermediary figure, Harry Doan, acting as a convenient buffer. Unfortunately for the proponents of this narrative, the specter of Seal appears throughout the official documentation of the Iran-Contra case. A May 1983 U.S. Customs report noted that an aircraft piloted by Frank Moss and owned by his Hondu Carib Aviation Company was involved in drug smuggling linked to Barry Seal. As previously mentioned, Moss and his aviation companies were entangled not only with the enterprise's Contra support efforts, but with repeat allegations of drug trafficking. Those allegations rang true in the case of this plane, tail number N90201, which made at least one airdrop of large quantities of marijuana and cocaine at an isolated farm near Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The farm's address, Route 6, Box 282E in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, belonged to Adler Barry Seal. Given Moss's ties to Matter's drug trafficking operations, it seems likely that Seal himself was part of these wider smuggling networks. It would also align Seal with the Cali cartel in addition to his earlier Medellin ties, which paints a complicated picture of the unstable alliances and power competitions that raged beneath the surface of this covert world. Journalist Daniel Hopsicker, in his biography of Barry Seal, writes that he obtained documents from the trafficker's widow which show that, in the 1980s, Seal was doing business with Summit Aviation. As mentioned in the previous chapter, Summit was controlled by the DuPont family and was managed by Patrick Foley, a veteran of the CIA and the Flying Tiger line. It was Summit that had provided a small aircraft that was utilized for a bombing run in Nicaragua, while it was Foley who had recommended a drug smuggler pilot to the State Department for the transportation of humanitarian supplies to the Contras. Foley, Hopsicker writes, was a SEAL associate whose name and number are in Barry's files. Summit was involved in the acquisition and trade of Beechcraft King Air, turboprop planes known for their flexibility and versatility. Seal, likewise, maintained his own King airplane, and one sporting the tail number N6308F had a particularly interesting provenance. It was owned by Gracus Incorporated of Phoenix, Arizona. I will. It was owned by Gracus Incorporated, a Phoenix, Arizona-based subsidiary of Greyhound Lines, the bus company. Gracus leased the plane to a company called Systems Marketing Incorporated, reportedly a subsidiary of another firm named Military Electronics. Systems Marketing provided the plane to Gene Glick, a real estate developer who, in turn, leased it to Seal. According to Hopsicker, Glick leased not just this, but several other of Barry Seal's planes and helicopters as well, during the time Seal was most active in drug and weapon smuggling. Other documents we uncovered revealed that Glick was also actively helping Seal purchase ocean-going vessels. Hopsicker reproduced an FAA form showing the leasing of the aircraft from Gracus to Systems Marketing. The form identifies Systems Marketing Vice President as Leonard F. Lavoie. Press reports at the same time suggested that Lavoie, at this time, was also affiliated with an aviation company called Skyways Travel and Tours, while his early career had revolved around Arizona real estate. During the 1970s, Lavoie had been the treasurer for the Hallwin Corporation, which had been founded by a man named Alan Winter. Wow. Winter, notably, was a known racketeer who, prior to relocating to Arizona, had operated out of the Seattle area and had been particularly close to Dave to Dave Beck, Jimmy Hoffa's mob-linked predecessor as president of the Teamsters Union. Both Winter and Lavoie had previously worked for the major Phoenix, Arizona construction firm Deli Webb Development Company. Del Webb had developed major projects like Sun City, the famous retirement community, yet what the builder and his company were best known for was their role in building and owning a number of Las Vegas casinos. Unsurprisingly, this brought him into close contact with organized crime interests, and to Bugsy Siegel and Mayor Lansky in particular, as well as to J. Edgar Hoover. There you go. Organized crime and intelligence going like this. According to Anthony Summers, Hoover, who rubbed shoulders with Webb at places like Hotel del Charro, a favorite haunt of mob-linked Texas oil bigwigs like Clint Murchison, appears to have protected the builder. Hoover, said Justice Department Attorney William Hundley, gave Webb a pass. He was his buddy. Hundley added that no bugs went in on Webb's places. It's unsurprising, then, that Webb himself came to own a number of casinos, including the Sahara, which he had acquired with loans from major Wall Street entities like Lehman Brothers and Morgan Guaranty. He also ended up with the Thunderbird Hotel and the Flamingo, which means that the money of Deli Webb Development Company had also freely mingled with that of the Moody family's American National Insurance Company. Anyhow, that Lavoie appears in the chain of custody that delivered a plane from the Grey Kiss into the hands of Barry Seal illustrates, once again, that the integration of organized crime networks into those of the intelligence community. It also makes one wonder if Gene Glick, the builder who acquired the plane from Sisters Marketing before leasing it to Seal, was himself tied to Del Webb's network. Grey Kiss itself was involved in large-scale financial crimes that also seemed nebulously linked to individuals in Seal's orbit. It was bilked for truly massive sums of money by a prolific confidence man by the name of Sheldon Player. Hopsiker writes that Player would sell Grey Kiss heavy machine tools, lease them back, and then pretend to sublease the expensive devices to end users. Sheldon would pocket the money, or perhaps move it on behalf of other parties, by siphoning it away into offshore bank accounts. According to Arthur Johnson, in his book Breaking the Banks, Player's preferred offshore banker was Gordon Ayton of Bank Intercontinental Limited. The true owners of Bank Intercontinental, located in the Cayman Islands, are unfortunately unknown, though Ayton himself was the Cayman's former Inspector General of Banks. A second company controlled by Ayton, Investment Consultants Limited, was also involved in Sheldon Player's activities. Intriguingly, Hopsiker reproduced a document from this very company showing that Ayton was in communication with Barry Seal. The document in question concerned payments and insurance on Seal's Learjet. After about a year after Moss's airdrops at Seal's farm, Seal had become deeply involved in a curious DEA sting operation. What made this sting so odd was that its goal was propagandistic in nature. It was intended to produce concrete evidence of collusion between the Sandinistas and the Medellin cartel. In June 1984, Seal flew, allegedly, into Nicaragua, where he picked up a load of cocaine. The pickup was covertly filmed and photographed, but the ongoing DEA operation quickly derailed. General Paul F. Gorman of the U.S. Military Southern Command publicly announced that evidence had been found linking the Sandinistas to drug traffic. However, corroboration that Seal indeed met with Sandinistas has never been produced. While Seal wasn't named by Gorman, he was fingered in an expose on the story published by the Washington Times. This whole series of events raises a number of questions. The Southern Military Command had been linked to arms flows to the Contras, while the Washington Times was owned by the Unification Church, the China lobby-aligned sect that, at the time, was involved in private fundraising for the rebels. What? As Peter Dale Scott and Jonathan Marshall note in their book, Cocaine Politics, Seal and photos from this odd DEA operation were featured prominently in North's notebooks and personal diaries at the time, and North had gone out of his way to acquire copies. One note recorded by North, based on a report from the CIA's Dwayne Claridge, stated that DEA thinks CIA linked info to Gorman. Did the Enterprise or the CIA or some other party intentionally disrupt the DEA operation? Barry Seal's life was ultimately cut short by a hail of gunfire in Baton Rouge on February 19th, 1986. The official story is that the smuggler had been taken out by a hitman dispatched by the Medellin cartel, who had placed a bounty on Seal when it became known that he was involved with the DEA. It's possible, however, that there were other actors in play. As Daniel Hopsicker reported, rumors have abounded that the source of the hit was really the CIA or Oliver North, or even George H.W. Bush. It was alleged, for instance, that Seal had considerable evidence on the vice president's sons, George W. and Jeb Bush, receiving a large amount of cocaine. Bob Thomason, a Louisiana State Police officer, told Hopsicker that the FBI had taken charge of the crime scene and removed boxes from the trunk of Seal's car, boxes that contained very, very compelling documents and tapes. There is also the question of the weapon used in the hit. It had been sourced from Jose Corton, the owner of a gun store and fashion boutique in Miami. Corton had been one of many CIA-trained Cuban exiles, having served in Brigade 2506, though it is unknown if he participated in Bay of Pigs. In the 1980s, he was deeply involved in Contra support activities and had been flipped into acting as an FBI informant. Through the information that he provided to the Bureau, we know that he was acquainted with a number of key players. These included the principals of Frigorificos, the Colombian cartel front company contracted by the State Department, the CIA and cartel-linked rancher in Costa Rica, John Hull, Tom Posey of Civilian Material Assistance, the militia special forces group tied to the Enterprise and to John K. Singlaub, and Jack Terrell, the early Iran-Contra whistleblower. Barry Seal's untimely death didn't put an end to the goings-on in Mena, however. Russell Welch, a state police investigator who had been monitoring Seal, noted that in 1987, there was a spate of new activity in the Mena airport with the appearance of an Australian business, and C-130s had appeared. There were, in fact, two Australian companies, Southern Cross Aviation Incorporated and Multi-Trade, that had set up shop in Mena in the immediate post-SEAL years. Southern Cross was an aircraft ferrying company with an apparent specialty in moving C-130s, while Multi-Trade was an aircraft interiors business. The two shared several common principles, who in turn took an active interest in the aircraft being stored at Mena. One of Multi-Trade's executives, a former Australian Air Force pilot named Glenn Conrad, held a stake in one C-130 that he subsequently sold to a company in Florida called African Air Trans Incorporated, Florida. Florida business records show that African Air was owned by Henry A. Wharton, a fairly well-known pilot and smuggler with known ties to the CIA. African Air Trans Incorporated is mentioned again in the next chapter, as the C-130 it bought was tied to another CIA-linked company, E-Systems. In December 1988, the C-130 took off from Mena, destined for somewhere in Africa. It was seized by U.S. Customs in Florida. Press reports from 1991 state that the plane had been accused of violating regulations on trafficking arms, and that Wharton's company was actually a dummy front set up to obscure the real owner. The plane had actually been acquired, the article continues, by an unnamed Israeli living in Panama who set up a fake American corporation and mortgage on the aircraft to cover his ass. You don't say. Cover his ass. Several years later, in the summer of 1991, another C-130 linked to Mena met an odd fate. It crashed on a runway in Luanda, the capital city of Angola, killing all on board, including Chuck Hendricks, a 34-year-old aircraft mechanic from Arkansas. Hendricks' parents, who lived in Mena, set out to learn what happened to their son, only to be confronted with a web of mysteries. The C-130 had been owned by a Delaware company called CZX Productions, and the crew had been hired by a German firm called Unitran International. The hell? Okay. See what they're doing? They're trying to obscure their tracks. They're trying to cover for that. They're trying to cover their ass. Both of these companies, in turn, were controlled by a shadowy German aviation specialist named Dietrich Reinhardt. Reinhardt's name will be instantly recognizable to those familiar with the Iran-Contra affair. One of the companies he controlled, St. Lucia Airways, had been utilized by the Enterprise to ferry weapons to the Middle East. According to Albert Hakim, St. Lucia was a CIA proprietary firm. If Reinhardt was involved with aircraft from Mena as late as 1991, it seems that whatever was taking place in Arkansas was an ongoing operation. Wow. So that ends that portion of that chapter about Seal. Now we're going to the next portion, whatever it is, down in Arkansas. Hot Spring, Arkansas was, to quote Roger Morris, the Geneva of organized crime in the 1920s and 30s. It was where the barons, the gangster bosses, came to meet. That association certainly continued through the decades. Influence over the city, considered a neutral territory for the different, often competing criminal gangs, families, and outfits, was held by Oni Madden, a New York gangster whose distinctive nickname was the Killer. Madden was reportedly something of an ambassador for Mayor Lansky, and counted among his close associates Frank Costello, who popped up in Hot Springs from time to time. New Orleans crime boss Carlos Marcello was reported to have held significant influence over Hot Springs as well. There is some evidence, albeit circumstantial, that a young Bill Clinton might have had contact with these forces while he was growing up in Arkansas. Uh-oh. The man that Clinton had often referred to as the most commanding male presence in his life and a father figure was his uncle, Raymond Clinton. Outwardly, Uncle Raymond ran a profitable car dealership, but he was also known to have engaged in various vices in backroom wheeling and dealing. According to a former Arkansas FBI agent, Raymond ran some slot machines that he had scattered about town, while close business associates have admitted that the car dealer had considerable dealings in the underworld. Along the way, Raymond began to collect political power. He cultivated ties to the state's Democratic Party, but also political figures in surrounding states like Alabama's George Wallace, the segregationist. These ties paid off in a big way for Bill Clinton in 1968. It was a big year for Bill. He had just won a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University in the United Kingdom and was on the verge of being drafted. Being shipped off to war in Vietnam would have derailed Oxford entirely, and so Uncle Raymond leapt into action. Using his political connections, he was able to secure for Bill a draft deferral. Wow. Uncle Raymond tended to crop up at opportune moments such as these, where Clinton's political destiny seemed to hang in the balance. In 1974, when Bill embarked on his first political campaign for Arkansas's House of Representatives, Raymond arranged for a $10,000 loan for his nephew from the First National Bank of Hot Springs. What? While Bill would lose the race, 2 years later, he secured a position as Arkansas's Attorney General. This was the springboard for his next venture, the 1978 campaign for governor. This campaign was a success, thanks in no small part to loans and donations from Arkansas's economic elite. Here, once again, one could find the name of Raymond Clinton. In addition to the assistance provided by Uncle Raymond and his friends, Clinton may have had other benefactors who helped shape his early political education, if not his career itself. There are hints, rumors, and intimations of a relationship with the CIA during the 1970s, particularly during his year at Oxford, which had been secured with the aid of Raymond. A former CIA officer told Roger Morris and Sally Denton that he had seen Clinton's name on a list of informants used by the agency's Operation Chaos, the surveillance program aimed at the anti-war and civil rights movements. Another officer stated that part of Clinton's arrangement as an informer had been further assurance against the draft. Reportedly, Clinton was regularly debriefed by the CIA, who he supplied with information concerning activist groups on British campuses. Wow. The underworld figures like Barry Seal, who haunted Mena, seemed to always operate with much less than 6 degrees of separation from Clinton during his time as the state's governor. In his 1999 confessional expose, Crossfire, Witness in the Clinton Investigation, former Arkansas policeman turned personal driver and security guard for Bill Clinton, L.D. Brown, recounts how Clinton encouraged him to seek out a post at the CIA. Clinton allegedly went so far as to edit the essay Brown wrote for this employment action application. What the hell? Oh my God. Oh my God. The essay topic was drug smuggling in Central America. Upon receiving his application, the CIA put Brown in touch with none other than Seal. Seal was far from being the only affiliate of Oliver North running a Contra-connected operation in Arkansas. Terry Reed, who had worked for North since 1983, claimed to have been put in touch with Seal by North and established a base just 10 miles north of Mena in Nella, Arkansas, where Nicaraguan Contras and other recruits from Latin America were trained in resupply missions, night landings, precision paradrops, and similar maneuvers, according to Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey St. Clair. Wow. Reed charges that another figure in this circle, with particularly close ties to Seal, was Dan Lassiter. Lassiter was the ultimate Little Rock operator. During the day, he was renowned for his lucrative bond brokerage business, Lassiter and Company, while after nightfall, he had a reputation as a party animal. Lassiter was plugged into the world of Arkansas cocaine, something he shared with his close friend, Roger Clinton. Roger was, of course, the brother of then Governor Bill Clinton. It was revealed during the course of the Whitewater investigations that Roger Clinton had even spent several years working for Lassiter. Just like his close friends, scandal seemed to follow Lassiter. In 1977, his private jet turned up in Las Vegas with Jimmy Chagra, a prominent drug trafficker, on board. 2 years later, Chagra contracted hitman Charles Harrelson to assassinate federal judge John H. Wood Jr. in San Antonio, Texas. God damn. Several years later, in 1984, Lassiter purchased a ski resort in a remote northern corner in New Mexico. According to journalists Denton and Morris, Lassiter was given free rein to use Bill Clinton's name commercially to help promote the isolated development. They continue. Undercover law enforcement agents later found the resort a center for drug running, what U.S. Customs called a large controlled substance smuggling operation and large-scale money laundering activity. While Lassiter held Arkansas's week at the resort with Governor Clinton's endorsement and entertained politicians from Santa Fe as well as Little Rock, local New Mexico sheriffs were hearing reports from Angel Fire reminiscent of Mena, strange nighttime traffic, sightings of parachute drops, even hikers' accounts of a big black military-type cargo plane, seeming to come out of nowhere and swooping low and almost silently over a deserted mountain near the remote ski area. The hell? Golly. I mean, I knew Bill Clinton was corrupt, but damn, I'm even learning this from way back. Woo! Good Lord. Rumors of drug trafficking, money laundering, powerful military connections, and the shadowy presence of military activity grew throughout the latter half of the 1980s and into the early 1990s. A tantalizing early reference to an Arkansas project connected to the Iran-Contra affair can be found in a legal declaration drafted by Daniel Sheehan in connection with the lawsuit he brought against the Enterprise on behalf of journalists Tony Ervigan and Martha Honey. This project was reportedly a scheme to set up a training facility for anti-communist insurgents, in this case, Laotian tribesmen. A key witness in Sheehan's lawsuit, Gene Wheaton, identified some of the backers of this project as Rick Wade, a private citizen from Alaska, a long way from home, William Bode, a State Department employee whose name appeared in Oliver North's personal notebooks, and Vaughn Forrester, an assistant to the pro-Contra Congressman William McCollum, and CIA officer Carl Jenkins. Some managers of the Daisier Rifle Company, writes Sheehan, provided property in western Arkansas for the training camp. That there was interest in training Laotian tribesmen for anti-communist purposes isn't as strange as it might sound. In the early 1980s, prior to the spin-up of the Enterprise, the National Security Council ran an off-the-books operation aimed at supporting Laotian anti-communists that was financed via private donations to a slew of PAL MIA groups. Many of the donors, including Nelson Bunker Hunt and Ellen Garwood, would subsequently emerge as major private donors to the Enterprise. And much like the case of private donations to the Contras, money for the Laotian operation moved through familiar banks. One of these was none other than the sole branch of BCCI. Here we go with BCCI. This money, as reported in a memo by Senate investigator John Mattis, was used to arm Laotian resistance groups in a covert network run by members of the NSC. Rick Wade, the private citizen named by Wheaton, had been active in the POW MIA movement and was likely connected to the NSC's operations. During the 1980s, he had developed contacts with aides to Vang Pao, the Hmong opium warlord that had been so close to Ted Shackley and his team a decade prior. He became a lobbyist for the Hmong in Washington and elsewhere, and would meet with figures like Ellen Garwood and Robert Owen in order to garner material support for the tribesmen. Gene Wheaton himself is an intriguing figure. A former Army criminal investigator and intelligence agent, Wheaton was on the periphery of the internal core of the enterprise, and was thus privy to many covert operations unfolding during the 1980s. His name appears within North's notebooks alongside those of Carl Jenkins, the CIA officer who has served under Shackley at JM Wave and in Laos. Wheaton and Jenkins were close friends and business associates. They were both attached, at one point in the mid-1980s, to an air freight company called National Air Cargo, and it was through Jenkins that Wheaton found himself enmeshed in the world of enterprise. Jenkins, as mentioned in Chapter 6, was connected with Charles Haynes and Bobby Ross via a web of companies that likely linked to covert operations. Ross, in turn, was a close associate of Barry Seal. Good Lord have mercy. Attempts to investigate Clinton's role in these sorts of operations and more broadly in the Iran-Contra affair were scuttled by Clinton's confidants, who consistently denied he played a role in the scandal. According to the Wall Street Journal, former IRS investigator William Duncan teamed up with Arkansas State Police investigator Russell Welch in what became a decade-long battle to bring the matter to light. Yet, of the 9 separate state and federal probes into the affair, all were shut down. Duncan would later say of the investigations, they were interfered with and covered up, and the justice system was subverted. A 1992 memo from Duncan to high-ranking members of the Attorney General's staff notes that Duncan was instructed to remove all files concerning the Mena investigation from the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General, serving under George H.W. Bush at the time, was William Barr. As mentioned before, Barr had been a former CIA officer before joining the agency-linked law firm of Shaw Pittman, Potts, and Trowbridge. Reed alleged that one of the CIA's point men in the Arkansas operations was a man who claimed to be the general counsel for Southern Air Transport and went by the name Robert Johnson. Johnson seemed to give Governor Clinton his marching orders and was particularly incensed when Bill's wayward brother, Roger Clinton, was busted in 1985 for peddling cocaine. As previously mentioned, Roger's penchant for cocaine was one he shared directly with Lassiter, who testified that the two had frequently indulged in the drug together. Johnson reportedly told Clinton that he was Mr. Casey's fair-haired boy, and that Arkansas had been the CIA's greatest asset. Johnson went on to deliver to Clinton the following message. Mr. Casey wanted me to pass on to you that unless you fuck up and do something stupid, you're number 1 on the short list for a shot at the job you've always wanted. You and guys like you are the fathers of the new government. We are the new covenant. According to Terry Reed, who witnessed these happenings, he would later learn that Robert Johnson was none other than William Barr. I thought he was some Republican that was with Trump. See, this is all one big ass club. This whole left to right shit is a sham. These allegations place Barr's use of the alias Robert Johnson in an interim period where little is known about Barr's activities. He had served as Deputy Assistant Director for Legal Policy in the Reagan White House until September 1983, and then had joined President Bush's Justice Department in 1989. As previously discussed, it was between the months of September and October 1983 that Casey's pre-enterprise support for the Contras began moving in a concrete way, and it was also in this same period that Manuel Noriega had entered the picture. The answers that Barr provided to the Senate Judiciary Committee states that between 1983 and 1989, he had returned to the CIA-linked firm of Shaw, Pittman, Potts, and Trowbridge, and in 1985, he had become a partner at that firm. As for Roger Clinton, after he was released from prison in 1986, he went to work at Calumet Farms, a horse farm in Lexington, Kentucky. Calumet's owner, J.T. Lundy, had been a longtime friend and a business partner of Lassiter, who was something of a big name in the inner circle of Lexington's elite. Lundy boasted his own roster of organized crime contacts. One figure who flickered in and out of Calumet was Robert Libutti, a brash New Jersey gambler, racehorse consultant, and associate of the Gambino crime family. All in all, it was an interesting environment for a politician's brother out on parole who was ostensibly seeking to clean up his act. Right. Clean up his act. Just across the street from Calumet were a pair of curious horse farms. One was owned by Nelson Bunker Hunt of the Dallas Hunt family, who had been one of Oliver North's prominent Contra donors. Next door was Murdy Farms, purchased in 1984 by fellow Texan and fraternity brother of Nelson Hunt, George Aubin. Aubin was part of the savings and loan crowd down in Texas, and was something of a mentor to a mega borrower named John Riddle. Besides looting S&Ls, Riddle had a taste for aviation, which was expressed through his ownership of a company called First Western Airline. According to Ari Ben-Menash, First Western was used as a cutout by the Israelis and the CIA to transport American arms to the Middle East. Additional information about the MENA operation was provided in a deposition given by the controversial Iran-Contra whistleblower Richard Brennicky. His allegations, made in the summer of 1991, were recently summarized in a lawsuit filed on behalf of Linda Ives, the mother of Kevin Ives. Kevin's body was found, along with that of his friend Dan Henry, on train tracks near Alexander, Arkansas, under exceedingly strange circumstances. According to this summary, Brennicky claimed that he had flown 10 to 12 flights of a C-130 into Mena, Arkansas airport, and took guns and paramilitary forces from Mena to Panama. Cocaine was being flown back from Latin America to the Mena airport, where it was dispersed to, among others, representatives from New York City organized crime. One of the most fascinating parts of Brennicke's allegations is that he moved money that had been paid by the organized crime figures for the drugs into accounts in a Panamanian bank held in the name of International Fund for Mergers and Acquisition, IFMA, a company where he was acting as vice president. IFMA was reportedly not only utilized by the CIA, but by Michael Harari, Mossad's man in Panama, to launder money and arrange war arms shipments in Latin America. The company's president was Ramon D'Onofrio, a businessman with a long track record of shady deals and bankruptcies. A New York Times article identified D'Onofrio as a business associate of Alfred Bueller, a lawyer from Liechtenstein, who was reported by the paper as being protected by the CIA itself, of course. Another D'Onofrio business partner was Charles Hurwitz, the big-time corporate raider who, from his humble beginnings as a prominent commodities trader in Bosch and Company, had developed extensive holdings ranging from the Kaiser Aluminum Corporation to Arkansas's real estate to the United Financial Group, UFG, the largest S&L in Texas. Hurwitz filled UFG's asset sheets with junk bonds peddled by Drexel Burnham Lambert, which also owned a 10% stake in the S&L. This wasn't Hurwitz's only involvement with the Drexel Burnham junk bond kings. A sale of $450 million worth of junk bonds was sold to help a Hurwitz company, Maxim, take over California Pacific Lumber. UFG was subsequently bought by the New York bonds trader and financier Louis Ranieri, who appears in Jeffrey Epstein's contact book with 8 phone numbers and 2 addresses listed. Ranieri is best known for his role in developing the first market for mortgage-backed securities. Hurwitz, while he was still riding high on Drexel's runaway junk bond train, developed several business ventures with the mob-linked S&L bigwig from Louisiana, Herman Beebe. As mentioned in the previous chapter, Beebe had, during the 1970s, owned a warehouse where explosives destined for Cuban exiles were stored. Explosives that were meant to be moved by Barry Seal prior to a customs sting. Good grief. Herman Beebe had a tendency to appear at the same S&Ls where Mario Renda could also be found. Renda, as noted in the previous chapter, was Adnan Khashoggi's friend with a penchant for seeding fraudulent borrowing with Teamster pension fund deposits. A list of banks controlled or suspected of being controlled by Beebe from a 1985 comptroller of the currency report included Mainland Savings of Houston. This is the same S&L where Renda had broken deposits and where Khashoggi had involved himself in an aforementioned series of bewildering deals. Were Renda and Beebe operating in concert? A smoking gun is hard to discern, but the two both hung out and arranged deals at the La Costa Resort in Southern California. La Costa, as noted in Chapter 1, had long been a mob hangout. It had been built with the aid of Teamster pension fund loans, and Burton Cantor, was listed as the resort's agent at the time it was incorporated. Bibi had other potential ties to Iran-Contra. The same comptroller of the currency report that named Bibi-linked banks also listed Palmer National Bank in Washington, D.C. If Bibi did control Palmer, it was hidden. The bank's founder was Stephen Halper, a D.C. bureaucrat who had held various positions within the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations. Halper's father-in-law was Ray Klein, the old OSS and CIA veteran who, at the time, was working with John Singlaub of Geomilitech. Palmer was also where the National Endowment for the Preservation of Liberty, the Contra fundraising apparatus set up by Spitz Channel on behalf of the enterprise, held its bank accounts. According to internal NEPL documents acquired by P. Bruton from the National Security Archives in D.C., the NEPL maintained accounts at only one other bank, Irving Trust, the New York City-based commercial bank. Irving Trust was also the major financier, alongside Drexel Burnham Lambert, of Charles Hurwitz's Pacific Lumber takeover. Irving Trust, which subsequently was purchased by Bank of New York with the aid of Bruce Rappaport. Bank of New York and Rappaport's Intermaritime Bank, IMB, would become intertwined when the stake held by BCCI and IMB was purchased by BNY. Irving Trust also maintained a branch in Little Rock, Arkansas, in the late 1970s. An intern at this branch was James T. Riyadi, the son of a prominent Indonesian banker and businessman named Mokhtar Riyadi. Together, the Riyadi family, originally from China's Sichuan province, and their close relationship with another giant of Arkansas businesses, Jackson Stevens, would become crucial to understanding what exactly was happening in Arkansas during Clinton's time as governor. Oh my God. I'm going to stop right here for tonight and pick up another section of this chapter tomorrow. Holy crap. Holy crap. Before he even became president. Yo, holy crap. Intertwined with organized crime, mob, CIA. And with that, I'm going to end that section right there for tonight. And you can catch me. I will do the next portion tomorrow. I promise. This is insane. With that, have a good night. Stay informed and always stay informed to deprogram propaganda. With that, have a good night. And I'll see you tomorrow. I'm probably going to be doing another section of the reading at 7 p.m. tomorrow rather than at 9. I just had company over. But have a good night.